What's good? Bo back at you with another video. Today I'm going to be discussing all the major changes coming to gear in Shadowlands from BFA. Remember, this is all in the beta and is subject to change before the actual release of Shadowlands, but let's get into it. Blizzard's motto this time around going into Shadowlands is to let loot be loot. Well, what does that mean? It means when a piece of loot drops, it is guaranteed to be that piece of loot all the time. Everything is becoming standardized, meaning it's the same across the board. Titan forging will no longer exist, and obtaining your absolute best possible gear should be much more feasible now. The days of praying for a max item level Titan forge on every piece of gear are finally over, and that is a celebration in itself. Titan forging was implemented with the hopes of getting veteran players to be excited about random stat rolls, and this essentially never outdated content because you could continuously be on the hunt for gear that could always be improved in a sense. Combined with the many ways of how we could get gear, the amount of Titan forging was endless. This led to very replaceable gear that felt unsatisfying if it didn't Titan forge or come with a socket. Look at Eternal Palace and all the crazy trinkets that came out of there like Font and Coral. Those are still being used by some classes today, and getting a Warforge or socket on those items was like winning the lottery. Speaking of sockets though, they are still appearing in Shadowlands, but you can add them onto your pieces similar to the Gouged Eye of N'Zoth for a new currency called Stygia and can be purchased from Foerari in the Maw. They will also only be available on select armor slots, being your helm, neck, wrist, belt, and rings. When a piece does drop and it does come with a socket, think of it as a nice time save rather than it devaluing your gear without a socket. You can still work towards those sockets, and it being on far less pieces now means the power difference between fully socketed gear and non-socketed gear will be far less than it was in BFA. Tertiary stats like Leech will still have a chance to drop on gear as well, but those stats are not directly correlated to your power. Rather, they are nice quality of life features that shouldn't really affect your gameplay. Overall, the quality of loot is going up significantly since the gear you get will be at its highest possible item level already, depending on the content. What you see in the dungeon journal is what you're going to get. To make gear more valuable though, they are reducing the amount of gear that drops from raids and dungeons. Don't be surprised if only 2 pieces of loot drop from a raid boss now, and it's going to feel much more satisfying once you've finally gotten the piece you were after. With Titan forging, you needed many chances at gear because there were so many levels of RNG involved with it. That won't be the case anymore. Once you obtain loot, there is no RNG involved other than the occasional sockets. Also, by reducing the amount of loot that drops, it leads to more replay value as well. It'd be pretty strange if we managed to get all our best loot after like 1 month, because then you'd really have no gear incentives until next tier. In tandem with less drops overall, there would no longer be bonus rolls going into this expansion. Again, this goes back to making loot feel more valuable and slowing down how fast we gear. I've seen mixed reactions about this change. I personally don't mind it because usually you would just save your bonus rolls for specific bosses only to get shafted most of the time. It was great for targeting certain pieces of gear, but in reality it was just another form of RNG that felt pretty lackluster even if you did bonus roll the piece you wanted. The new weekly vault can be thought of as pseudo bonus rolls because it gives you more options at specific gear if you put in the effort. To anyone who doesn't know, the weekly vault is the new weekly chest that has the potential to provide up to 9 different pieces of gear depending on how much content you did, and you will get to pick 1 piece of gear from those options. There are 3 types of content the vault will pick from, being raiding, Mythic Plus, and PvP. The more content you do, the more chances you will have at different gear from that respective source, and it will not be a duplicate. For Mythic Plus specifically, you need to clear 1 dungeon for the first option, 4 for the second, and 10 for the final option. The item level of each reward is determined by your first highest key completed, your 4th highest key completed, and the 10th highest key completed. Right here, I have a table showing the rewards you would get from the weekly vault correlating to the key level. It's important to note that you only need to do a 14 now for the highest item level in your weekly vault. But let's say you did 7 plus 15s, 2 plus 14s, and then 2 12s. The game is going to organize those dungeons from highest to lowest. So for the first option, it will go off the highest 1 dungeon you completed, which would be a 15. For the second option, it would pick the 4th highest level, which would still be a 15. Then the last option would be different because the 10th highest level is only a 12, and it would make the third option item level based off that. If we wanted to get another reward based off of a 14, we would have to complete 1 more 14. It should feel more rewarding in the end because you will have more options to choose from and hopefully target any specific items you may want, especially if there's another item like a Tiku. And if you don't like any of your options, you can choose to get Anima, which isn't too exciting but gives you an easier way to get some Mogs or upgrade your Covenant Sanctum once you're all decked out. I'll leave a link to the article down below if you want to find out more about the weekly vault. But if we take a look back at this table, we can see that the item level of the highest end of dungeon loot from Mythic Plus has been nerfed to be lower than heroic gear by 3 item levels now. This will be the first time that Mythic Plus gear from the end of the dungeon doesn't offer equivalent or better gear than heroic rating. So, how does this affect us as players? Well, it means Mythic Plus isn't that great for getting gear outside of your weekly chest, especially with dungeons only offering a 20% chance to drop a piece of loot for you. Even the gear you do manage to get from Mythic Plus will most likely get replaced with heroic raid gear, but is only a 3 item level difference, which is like nothing in the grand scheme of things. But why is this change even necessary? Who knows, man, it's Blizzard. They might just want to cut hardcore raiders so they can't trade heroic gear from the start, but this shouldn't be too much of an issue, especially after the first couple of weeks. I would like to think it's more so to keep heroic raid gear more relevant throughout the expansion. From my experience, I usually never went back into heroic after gearing from Mythic Plus unless it was like for a specific trinket or weapon. All this ties back into making loot feel more valuable, and it doesn't change that much for most players. This change does hurt people who love Mythic Plus though and wanted to see it as an actual progression system that could offer similar rewards to high-end rating at high keystone levels. Mythic Plusers shouldn't feel too down though, because you can still get Mythic level gear from your weekly vault, which has always been a big incentive to do Mythic Plus for a majority of people. Maybe this will encourage people to do even more Mythic Plus now for the extra options, rather than just the 1 weekly and never going back in, which is also still an option available to you. But if we take a look back at this table, we can see all the item levels of the gear for every difficulty of rating. Big takeaways here are that the gear between difficulties is only a 13 item level difference now, down from the usual 15. This change is probably to tone down our player power, especially by the last tier of the expansion, where we are significantly more powerful than we were compared to the first tier. It also helps to make our gear not completely irrelevant as soon as the next tier comes out, since it should be closer in item level compared to how it was in BFA. Next thing is the last 2 bosses are following the same trend of the latest raid, dropping higher item level gear than the previous bosses. The last 2 bosses of a tier are typically much harder than the previous ones, so the difference in gear is to reflect that challenge. However, the difference is only 7 item levels now compared to the 10 it was in BFA. That being said, if you do want the best possible gear for your character, you will need to Mythic raid. Another change for the raids is that the weapons are going to come from a token you exchange at your Covenant Sanctum. The token will be similar to armor tokens in previous expansions, with certain classes being grouped together for specific tokens. This is a good change in my books, as it makes weapons much more versatile and easier to obtain now. The big issue before, especially in Mythic raiding, is that only certain classes could obtain a particular weapon, with limited spots being available in the raid, leaving little potential to loot the item or trade it to another person. As a Demon Hunter main, I am the only class that can loot Warglaives, so obtaining one from personal loot is challenging sometimes because I can only rely on myself to loot the item or another Demon Hunter who already has it. This issue could have been much worse in Shadowlands if they kept it how it was previously, because there would be far less drops as a whole now, and there would be no more bonus rolls either. Being able to get my weapon from a token now is going to remove those problems and make it more flexible and beneficial to other classes as well. If you're a PvPer, I have some great news for you. There is now a PvP vendor who will sell you gear for a certain amount of conquest or honor points. This is great because PvPers won't feel the need to do other content as much anymore by having a reliable source of gear acquisition. Previously, you would have to hope gear dropped after an arena match or get it from your weekly PvP chest, but now you can just go ahead and buy it. Higher item level gear is going to be based off your particular arena rating that I'm sure will follow a similar format to BFA's cutoff points of Challenger, Rival, etc. All the gear from this vendor will have at least 2 combinations of secondary stats, with versatility being guaranteed on every piece, which is essentially the stat all classes want for PvP. Unfortunately, you will not be able to get every perfect combination of versatility you want for every piece of gear, at which point you will need to resort to other sources for those pieces if you want to min-max. There will also be a PvP bonus of 20% more versatility in PvP content for wearing any 2 combination of PvP trinkets. The Gladiator's Medallion, Relentless, and Adaptation will all have their effects on trinkets now and contribute to 1/2 needed for the PvP set bonus, with the other half coming from the typical trinkets that boost your stats, like the Gladiator's Insignia. Lastly, you'll be able to upgrade all this gear for a certain amount of honor or conquest points. That pretty much covers it. Those are the biggest changes to gear going into Shadowlands, but how do all these changes affect you moving forward? Well, getting gear should be harder now, since the overall distribution of it will be far less than what we were used to compared to BFA, but at the same time, it makes it feel far more valuable and satisfying to get. With Titan Forging, there were just so many endless possibilities of what could happen with gear that acquiring your best in slot felt almost impossible. That should no longer be the case, with far less scenarios of wondering whether or not this piece of gear is an upgrade. Overall, I think it should balance out in the end compared to BFA, and I think more players will be satisfied knowing their gear is far less replaceable and more meaningful throughout the expansion. That's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know what your thoughts are on all the gearing changes down in the comments below. Leave a like if you did like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here for more content. But until next time, dudes, peace.